Morning kids! Today I want to talk about Jacob Rees-Mogg and what it means to be ruled by con artists. I'm going to play some clips from today from Jacob Rees-Mogg's podcast because of course he has one. And I want you to think of the con called the bait and switch, which is where the salesman presents their victim with one product and then once they've signed, they change it to something less valuable. And today, Jacob Rees-Mogg basically admitted to the con that he and the Tories have played. It starts with the co-host saying,
built into the referendum was the fact that you were voting yea or nay, but you couldn't know what sort of a deal we would get.
You're quite right. In 1975, people really knew what they were voting for because it was Harold Wilson's slightly changed deal, or going back to where they'd been 2 years before.
What he's doing there is correctly recognising the principle of informed consent. Back in 1975, when we had the referendum on originally joining, the treaty that the equivalent of the EU was based on was called the Treaty of Rome. That was the deal that would define our relationship with the other European countries if we voted in. And that deal already existed before the vote, so everybody knew, or at least could know, what they were voting for at the time.
In 2016, and actually also in the referendum in 2014 on Scottish independence, the government, as a matter of policy, did not want to set out what it was going to look like if you voted to leave either union, because part of their campaign was to say this is a great leap into the unknown. And I think actually in both cases this was really rather irresponsible. People had different views of what Brexit meant and how it should be implemented.
Would you look at that? Jacob Rees-Mogg spitting actual facts, saying that the leave option hadn't been properly defined. Facts. Saying that therefore it was literally impossible for Leave voters to know what they were actually voting for? Fact! And that the 52% wanted things that were incompatible with each other because you can't have deal and no deal at the same time unless you're a philosopher's pet? Facts! Saying that it was irresponsible for David Cameron to call the referendum in the first place, even though Jacob Rees-Mogg voted for it, like a lot. Facts. Now obviously the idea that it's the fault of the campaign to remain for not coming up with a plan to leave is batshit insane. And for the people who promoted leaving without providing a clear plan to do so, to blame remainers for that shows a level of immaturity that you wouldn't expect from a fetus. But listening to him today, it sounds like he really understands that Brexit is by definition about international relations, which makes knowing the treaty that you're signing up to an essential part of informed consent. Because otherwise you might end up with 48% voting for the treaties of the European Union and 52% voting for some other relationship with no guarantee that they'd end up with the one that they wanted or that they all wanted the same one. And Mogg proved that in 2015 when he said,
"You could have two referendums, and as it happens, it may be more sense to have the second referendum after the renegotiation is completed."
Now granted, he was talking about Cameron trying to renegotiate that relationship as a member, but the point about having a referendum on any new UK-EU relationship being a democratic necessity is one that he clearly knows. And yet after he won that first referendum, what did he say about having one on the deal?
Or are we some small country that gets bullied by the European Union into voting again and again until we do what we're told? And I think that's undemocratic, and I think it's simply not how the British people would expect to behave.
Interesting. So once he got our consent on the principle of rejecting our old relationship, he then locked us in, said that any further democracy regarding the new relationship would be undemocratic. But a key element of any good bait and switch con is to sell the product in a way that looks nothing like what your victim will actually get. And the product here is the new relationship with the EU. And given that 1/3 of all the food eaten in the UK comes from the EU, our trading relationship when it comes to food is a critical part of that. And here's what he said about food when he was still selling us on the idea that that new relationship would be great.
We could have cheaper food, clothing and footwear straight away by getting rid of the protectionist anti-trade tariffs that the EU imposes, and it would be very good for the British people.
And here's what he said last year about what Brexit checks will do to food prices when they come into force at the end of this year.
Do you know what impact this will actually have on prices in supermarkets?
Well, some costs it would be quite significant. That if you look at small deliveries of things like cheese, you were talking about 71% increase maximum level on the retail price. And frankly, at that level, goods just wouldn't have come in.
Not to mention all the times that his Brexiteer colleagues said that Brexit wouldn't create any barriers to our trading relationship.
All those who say that there would be barriers to trade with Europe if we were to do a Brexit. It is totally and utterly absurd.
And yet here we are with the Brexiteer Prime Minister admitting that Brexit is damaging our trade. Textbook bait and switch. And it's the cruelty with which they did it as well. Because throughout the referendum, the Leave side kept telling us that Brexit was a way to get rid of all the expensive EU red tape, like rules and documents to fill, which they said were hurting British businesses. And now that it's the red tape of Brexit that's killing small businesses in the UK, Jacob Rees-Mogg says stuff like,
But some businesses that for other reasons have not been doing well like to blame Brexit, but that's actually an excuse of poor management.
now everything that I'm saying may just seem like news articles and stats, but it's real people's lives. I was out on the road speaking to people when this started happening in late 2018.
4 years ago I opened this business here in Cowbridge. It's a school uniform and stationery shop, an independent shop on Cowbridge High Street, and I source a lot of products from the single market. So we have school uniform that comes in from factories in Romania, pens and pencils that come from Germany, files and notebooks from France, other notebooks that we get in from the US. Buying things from all those European countries is super easy. It's just as easy as buying it down the road.
So why would Brexit affect you?
It's affected me already. So our cost prices here have gone up anything between 15 and 25% in the last 12 months.
Okay.
Yes. So like most retailers in the last 12 months, we have tried to absorb that cost as best we can. We're now at a point where we can't do that anymore. So I've had to lose 2 members of staff in the last 6 months in order to save the money that I would have spent on their wages to try and cover this cost price increases. We've unfortunately had to put our prices up a bit to try and cover the increase. You can't get away from it. You can't absorb 25% increase in costs.
That's who Jacob Rees-Mogg is talking about when he says,
But that's actually an excuse of poor management.
and Mogg, just like all the Tories, still maintain that they were just following democracy, even though Jacob Rees-Mogg has just admitted that Brexiteers couldn't have known what they were voting for because it was only decided by the government years later. Quick language lesson. The word democracy comes from 2 ancient Greek words, demos meaning people and kratos meaning power. It's not exactly people power if the people are conned into poverty by the powerful. Have a great week.